In Santa Monica, California, the night is getting darker and the streetlights flicker dimly under the night sky. On an ordinary night in 2017, 19-year-old Ethan and his girlfriend spent some quality time at a friend's house. When the bell rang at 7 o'clock in the evening, the two decided to end their happy party and head to Pine Hill. They stepped into a blue bus parked on the street. The body of the bus was slightly old-fashioned, like an old object that had been passed down from the 1980s to this day. The seats in the car were covered with faded blue velvet, and the floor was covered with worn plastic mats. The entire car was extremely quiet, and there were no other passengers except them. The lights inside the car are dim. The world outside the window seems to be shrouded in soft mist, and the hustle and bustle of the city seems to be isolated from this space. Ethan and his girlfriend were sitting at the back of the carriage, chatting softly and reminiscing about the evening's laughter. But as the bus traveled deeper into remote suburbs, Ethan gradually felt uneasy. The journey should only take half an hour, but it seemed incredibly long. The scenery outside the car became unfamiliar, the street lights were sparse, and the surrounding buildings and streets became more and more remote. Confused, Ethan walked up to the driver and asked if he was about to arrive at Pine Hill. The driver was silent for a moment, then suddenly turned around and told them in a cold and warning tone that they were in the wrong car and ordered them to get off immediately. The driver's face looked particularly gloomy under the dim light, with unusual anger in his eyes. The two were forced to get out of the car in a hurry, only to find themselves standing next to an old residential area called Sunset Gardens, opposite a deserted open space, and the surroundings were so silent that they could almost hear their own heartbeats. Ethan looked back at the bus slowly driving away, feeling an inexplicable fear in his heart. What surprised them even more was that the bus stopped not far away, and several people in old-fashioned clothes got off the bus. These people looked like they were dressed in the 1980s. Suddenly, a burst of fog rose, and the figures gradually blurred in the night. His girlfriend was so frightened by this scene that she started crying. While comforting her, Ethan turned around and saw that those people were gone. They tried using their cell phones to hail a ride back to the city, but found that their location on the map was blank. The phone could not be dialed, and several Ubers that were called in succession mysteriously disappeared when approaching their location. At this time, the bus gradually drove out of sight, leaving Ethan and his girlfriend standing next to the silent Sunset Gardens. Ethan tried to comfort his girlfriend, but he was also filled with confusion and fear. Everything around them seemed so strange and desolate that they felt as if they were in a completely different world. They started walking along the road, hoping to find their way back. In the night, the old house stood quietly, with the windows closed and no light coming out, making it look particularly eerie. In the grassy open space, when the wind blows, there seems to be a subtle rustling sound among the grass, which makes people shudder. Ethan and his girlfriend clung to each other, their footsteps echoing on the empty streets, each step increasing the uneasiness in their hearts. They looked back from time to time, as if they always felt like something was watching them secretly. There are occasionally a few parked vehicles on both sides of the street, but they are all of old models, as if time has stood still here. As they continued to move forward, Ethan began to feel an indescribable sense of oppression. Whenever they tried to use their phones to call for help, the signal seemed to be extremely weak, and all attempts to contact the outside world were in vain. This feeling of isolation made their fear reach its peak. They walked through a small forest, the shadows of the trees dancing in the moonlight, casting mottled shadows. Out of the woods, they came to an empty intersection. At this time, they heard the faint sound of vehicles in the distance, which gave them a glimmer of hope. But every time the sound of a vehicle approaches, it seems to disappear into the air at the last moment. In despair again and again, they sat on the stone steps by the roadside. Ethan's girlfriend was exhausted and burst into tears. Although Ethan tried to stay calm, his heart was full of doubts and uneasiness. He couldn't understand why they ended up in such a desolate place where no one cared about them and the signal disappeared. He looked around, the late-night silence making the place seem even more eerie and ominous. I don't know how long it took, but the moon was already hanging high in the sky. In this forgotten corner, Ethan and his girlfriend sat on the cold stone steps. The cold wind in the middle of the night was mixed with an inexplicable desolation. They felt as if time had stood still and everything around them seemed extremely quiet. Only their breathing echoed in the night sky. Just when they fell into despair, a light suddenly appeared in the distance. A taxi came slowly and stopped in front of them. Ethan pulled his girlfriend into the car without hesitation. After getting on the bus, I saw that the taxi driver was a man in his 40s, wearing a pair of light brown sunglasses and a silver cross hanging around his neck. The car smelled of old leather, and the scene outside the car window seemed blurry as it moved. After the driver asked them about their destination, he didn't say much. He just drove the car intently, occasionally casting a scrutinizing look in the rearview mirror. As the car drove away from Sunset Gardens, Ethan and his girlfriend relaxed a little. But their hearts are still full of questions and they don't understand why they are in such a situation. The atmosphere in the car was still heavy, but Ethan still couldn't help it and asked, "Sir, where was that just now?" The driver glanced at Ethan, then opened the window, and a gust of cold wind came in. And Ethan felt something, a glimmer of energy, and then the driver told them in a gravelly voice that they were lucky to have met him, otherwise they might have spent the whole night here. Ethan and his girlfriend leaned against each other and fell asleep without realizing it. The driver woke me up only when the car entered a familiar urban area. The street lights gradually became brighter and the traffic began to increase. After getting off the car, they found that it was not raining in the city. There were faint stars in the sky, and the clock on the building still showed 7:15. Ethan was just about to ask the driver what to order, but the taxi he just took had already driven away. Ethan took out his phone, and the signal was restored. He tried to search for the location of Sunset Gardens, but couldn't find any information on the map, as if the place had never existed. The next day, Ethan decided to return to the mysterious bus station, hoping to find some clues or explanations. He returned to the place where he had boarded the bus the night before, but there was no sign of the blue bus. There was no information about that train on the station's timetable, as if it had never existed. Ethan asked several passengers waiting at the station and nearby businesses, but no one could provide any information about the bus. This traceless disappearance made Ethan feel an inexplicable sense of loss and frustration. He even began to wonder whether the experience that night really happened, or whether it was just a hallucination between him and his girlfriend. In the next few days, Ethan and his girlfriend tried many times to recall the details of that night, but strangely, they found it increasingly difficult to recall the specific route number of the bus, or even the vehicle's name. The appearance also began to become blurry. It was as if some force was deliberately erasing their memories.